This video first started off when I was trying to determine when a video game is dead or dying. And the original video that I was making was how to tell when a game is dead or dying. And the idea was to create a resource that people could kind of figure out the best ways to investigate the game that they're looking into playing, maybe an old game they're thinking of jumping back into, or looking into a game whose servers have gone down and how to find private servers to play on if you really want to go back to that, what I presume to be at the time a dead game. But oh boy, did I find some very, very interesting information on the topic. I spent the last few days diving into Reddit groups, Discord groups, old websites, Wayback Machine, and other resources to determine what games are dead, which games are dying, and how to determine if your game is dead or dying. What we're really going to talk about in this video is why the latest and greatest MMO is already heading for the grave and its days are definitely numbered. Why your favorite MMO from back in the day died, and who's responsible for these dead games and these graveyards of lost hours, lost progression, and broken dreams. But first, we have to determine what defines a dead game, and the internet is in a, let's say, a disagreement as to what makes a game dead, what makes a game dying, and what games are considered dead on arrival. And for those of you who don't know, a game that is called dead on arrival basically means the game launched, the launch was shit, no one's playing the game 2 days afterwards. One of the best, more recent experiences I can think of would be Mortal Online 2, a game that was considered dead on arrival. The three different measurements that I see a lot of people using are the statistically dead game, the socially dead game, and the visually dead game. Now, these three things are very interesting, and personally myself, I went into this just going with statistics. You know, I can look at a graph and see, yep, this is when the game was doing good, this is when the game was doing bad, now the game is dead. I figured there'd be a pretty easy way to kind of, through percentages, through graphs, to kind of understand when a game is dying. The graphs were pretty good until I started comparing hundreds of them, 150 of them to be precise. The statistical charts were not enough for me. I needed something else to check my data that I had found basically solely through SteamDB. So first, let's talk about the statistically dead game in order to determine what does that mean, right? How do you tell if a game is statistically dead? Most of us would just go to a website like this. We'd go to the steamdb.info charts. And what you're looking at is you're looking for the 24-hour peak. Now, the issue with this is the very first entry, Lost Ark. Why is this a problem? Because there are not 172,000 people playing on Lost Ark right now. I know it, you know it, everybody knows it. If you want to defend Lost Ark, if you want to defend these numbers, I don't care. I got no tea, no shade from me, right? I don't play Lost Ark. I got no horse in that race. I will say that my belief is that over 50% of those are probably bots, especially today. It's a random Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. There's not 172,000 people playing right now. It's not happening. You can argue that until you're purple in the face. I don't care. Which means that Rust becomes then the most popular MMO currently. I don't know how much of that is botting. The other issue that we run into is a game like Final Fantasy XIV that has its own launcher. Now, if it has its own launcher, then we're not going to have data here. We also can't compare this data against more popular MMOs like World of Warcraft. Any MMO that exists off the Steam platform is going to be a lot harder to track. A lot of these companies don't give their numbers. Game like Star Citizen, actually, for not being a game really yet, doesn't have public stats in the same way. So it's hard to tell, but you do have some of your big hitters here. You have Final Fantasy XIV, New World, Path of Exile, Elder Scrolls Online. Even Fallout 76 has made kind of a resurgence, which is interesting. So how would we determine if a game is statistically dead? I'm going to use one of my favorite MMOs throughout this video as kind of a, I don't know what you'd call it. I don't know if you'd call it a control. I don't know exactly what we'd call it. But Champions Online. I have been playing Champions Online for probably the last decade. Yeah, released on June 2011. There are currently 13 people playing this game. I still play it to this day. I love Champions Online, and I considered it, at least 48 hours ago, I considered it a dead game, but it might not be. Now, statistics, we go to this chart, you're going to see something interesting. And this is something I want you to look at very carefully and to consider as we go through these games' statistics. Look at the shape of these bumps, right? So we're talking about March 5th at 10 UTC. We're looking at March 6th at 11:10 UTC. There's a lot of consistency going on. You can see it in the daily graph. You can see it in the weekly graph. Now, this is where stuff started getting a little weird, statistically speaking. When I looked at this game, I assumed that it was popular at one point and that it lost popularity. However, if you look at the 3-year look, the game hasn't really changed that much in popularity. It kind of goes up and down. It has peaks on weekends. If you look at all time, and if we shrink this down to get rid of these blank spots here, we'll go down to 2016. It's not that much. I mean, we're talking about 100 to 300. That's not many players. It's lost some of its regulars over the course of 6 years, but this is a tiny, tiny margin to be playing in between 100 to 300. That is a tiny margin. So really, I would say that Champions Online is just about as popular today as it's ever been, which is in some ways kind of sad, considering that I've been playing it for at least that long. Everyone would call Champions Online dead, but is it dead? That's a question we're hopefully going to answer by the end of this video. This video is going to turn out to be way longer than I thought it was going to be, because we have a lot to cover, a lot of ground to cover. I want to make sure that you know exactly where I'm coming from. So another game I want to look at, this is going to be a very, very different kind of game, right? Any of you who know Final Fantasy XIV, you already know that it had a massive resurgence and that it's only been growing, especially since the pandemic. During the pandemic, a lot of really huge streamers played the game and its numbers jumped dramatically. And you can really tell where that jump was back in 2020, between 2020 and 2021. And then there was a huge insurge of players, and quite a few of those players stuck around to keep playing. So this is interesting, because if we look back at 2016, we only have about, between 9,000 concurrent players. We still drop back down to 8,000, 9,000 for years. So we'd say about 4 years of, relatively consistent growth, because there are expansions coming out and that sort of thing. Probably what these spikes are a couple expansion drop dates. And then you have this. This right here is why I started looking into social hits, because looking at this chart, I was like, man, if it wasn't for social media and it wasn't for live streaming, I don't think that would have happened. I don't know if you would call that artificial inflation, because it is actual inflation of players in a game, but we know for certain that Final Fantasy XIV was a flop on launch to a certain degree. At least Square Enix was not too excited about it. So did the IP keep it alive long enough for social media to take over and for streaming to take over to bump it up to where it's at now? It's an interesting thought, because I had never really considered that a game's social hits would be as important as its development. So obviously, social hits don't mean crap if your game is crap. Like, the game's got to be good, or at least decent, right? Again, we have a lot of consistency. We can kind of determine the ups. We can determine the downs. We're playing with a larger margin here. Now, when we were looking at Champions Online, it was 100 to 300, and here it's 10,000 to 30,000, which is, as a percentage, the same exact range, what I find super interesting. It's just, it's the same type of fans of the game. It's just there's more of them for Final Fantasy XIV. The whole conversation is supposed to be around dead games, not games that are doing well and have been doing well. Star Trek Online, super interesting, right? So currently there are 250 people in game right now. Their 24-hour peak is about 1,730 players. This is on a random, Tuesday, Wednesday, so it's definitely not their weekend peaks. You can see they have another chart that's very predictable, just like the last two games we looked at. Looks like between 500 and 2,000 players per day. And if you look at their chart, their all-time chart, we're gonna notice something that we've been noticing before, is that this game, Star Trek, is about as popular as it's ever been. And I'm looking at some of these valleys too. 3,000 players, 3,000, 4,000. The game is as popular as it's ever been. I'm imagining that a lot of these spikes are probably content releases, updates, big patches, that sort of thing. And if someone had asked me, is Star Trek Online dead or dying? I would say, of course it is. It's old. It's old, and I don't know anyone who plays it. But it's not dead, and it's not dying per se, at least not in a statistical way, not in a meaningful way that I can tell. If you look at it for 1 week view, it's a pretty good line. You look at a month, it's a pretty good line. You look at 3 months, it's actually kind of up. You look at 6 months, and it's actually kind of up. It's doing pretty decent. Let's say this was the New World chart. I'd say this is good. Looks like New World's doing pretty good. So if I can say that about New World, why can't I say that about Star Trek? I hope that my point is coming across, and I know I'm kind of beating a dead horse with a lot of these, but I really wanted to show a lot of MMOs, a lot of them, the vast majority of them, and we could keep going through these all day long. They're very predictable. And the people who love them and the people who play them and the people who keep coming back to play them during expansions and during updates, it's the same. And it's not the same over months. It's not the same over years. It's the same over decades, multiple decades, because there is one game that we're going to focus on a little bit. And this is another one that I think is super important to look at. Old school RuneScape. Now, old school RuneScape, I like as an example because RuneScape as an IP is older than World of Warcraft by about 3 years and 10 months. And it has survived the times. And we're going to look at another chart pretty soon that shows that old school RuneScape is actually very popular. Very, very popular. Now, we only have about 1,200 players in game right now, and our 24-hour peak is about 1,500 players. Another important number, because technically there are more people that have been playing Star Trek Online than there are people playing old school RuneScape during the week. And this is a 24-hour period snippet. Keep that in mind. Again, very predictable numbers between 500 and 2,000. As we can tell, it's starting to get pretty normal to be in that range if you're outside of the newer MMOs like New World and the stupid popular ones like Final Fantasy XIV. And if you look at the lifetime, at least as long as RuneScape has been on Steam, the chart is the same. It's completely predictable. It's neither dead nor growing. The number of people who play RuneScape is the number of people who play RuneScape. I'm hoping that this is enough information to put out the idea that a game's life and death cycle is not determined by its age at all. Obviously, World of Warcraft exists, RuneScape exists, they're still winning. If you say that RuneScape is alive and well, then you must concede that Star Trek is alive and well as much as it's ever been. That Champions Online with its 50 players on 15 players on at any given time is as popular as it's ever been. Now we're going to shift over from a statistically dead game, and I think that we've defunct that a little bit. The idea that games, just because they're having a bad year, doesn't even mean that they are dying necessarily. It just means they're currently in a downward trend. You wouldn't say that a stock that's dropped significantly over the course of a couple weeks is a dead stock and everyone should sell. Every MMO has its ups and downs, and they're very predictable. They're usually within a very predictable range. And when you look at a game's 1 year, that 1 year seems to be basically the standard moving forward. You do have exceptions like Final Fantasy XIV where they grow, but that comes from social stimulation and that comes from social hits. After seeing that, I thought it prudent to look into the social hits, because I am myself a marketer, a digital marketer. I like looking at keywords. I like looking at what gathers attention and what holds attention in the sense of marketing. So we're going to go over to a different website. Now, this website I actually dislike quite a bit because the numbers are very misleading, and I don't believe that they're founded in reality as far as hard numbers like number of players. However, I do think that the website MMO Stats does paint a bit of an interesting picture, because what they're doing is they're basing all of their stats and statistics off of how many social hits each game gets. So basically, you have Genshin Impact here. Genshin Impact is going to have a set of keywords, and it's going to have, I don't know how many. You don't get to see that on the front end. I'm sure on the back end it looks really interesting. But Genshin Impact is going to have a bunch of keywords associated with it. Right here, it says the estimation of the number of players based on social signals from Genshin Impact, such as social followers, posts, likes, retweets, YouTube subscribers, Twitch viewers, and similar data, mostly from the US. Not a good number. This saying I don't even know why they would attempt to estimate the number of players based on social hits. This website is way more interesting if you consider it to be just a keyword and social hit follower. You would be able to understand trends a lot better and social trends a lot better utilizing this tool than you would utilizing the Steam DB tool. So basically what we're looking at here is this is the number of social hits up and down. They're equating it to a estimation number of players, which is just bogus. It's very strange. Basically, the reason I say that is, let's say Path of Exiles, the one of the lead developers gets caught in a scandal, was approached by a fan in the parking lot of the dev studio, and he shot him dead with like a state with stand your ground laws or some shit like that. You would have a massive number of social followers, posts, likes, retweets, YouTube videos, subscribers, Twitch viewers, and similar data, mostly in the US, surrounding that event. And then this number would say there's a lot more people playing the game. Like I said, you got to take these numbers with a grain of salt, because obviously during the scandal with World of Warcraft, it would have said the number of people playing the game tripled because the amount of social hits surrounding the game tripled. We're going to look at the top 10. Jesus, I can't believe Black Desert Online is... I have some strong opinions about Black Desert. So we can see that old school RuneScape is considered top 9. Now, we did look at this chart. Obviously, this 1200 is not accurate either, and we'll get into that. This 2000 is also not accurate. We'll get into that. We're just talking about the Steam numbers while we're looking at this chart. This is only Steam. RuneScape has multiple launchers, so there's people playing from different launchers. They're not all playing from here. I recognize that, and I want to make sure you guys know that I recognize that. However, I'm going to be speaking purely to the number of people playing on Steam because that's the number I have in front of me. What is a socially dead game? Very, very interesting topic. According to MMOstats.com, they consider a dead MMO to be a popular MMO that are now canceled with no current server activity. Basically, it doesn't matter how popular a game is, how popular a game was. It's dead if the server is dead. You can't play the game in the official capacity. It's dead. Probably a lot of people's definition of what a dead game is. It's not my definition of what a dead game is, but I'm sure that is what most people's definition of a dead game would be. People would consider a game dying when it's losing its concurrent player base, and it's dead when the servers turn off. One of the games in here is City of Heroes. Now, keep a look at City of Heroes because we're going to bring City of Heroes back into the picture soon, because City of Heroes is not dead. Not by a long shot, actually. Something interesting that the social trends bit says to me is that a game studio that is unwilling or incapable of keeping up with social trends and social trending is going to fall behind in a lot of ways and may appear to be dead or dying. Star Trek Online, by all social accounts, is considered dead. MMO Stats would assume, based on its social status, its social hits, that it has only about 500 players. We know that not to be true. We know it has about 4 times that many players. And it's super interesting because based on this kind of social hit model, It seems to me that games that are doing as good as they've ever been doing are seen as doing 10 times, 20 times, further down the list, 200 times worse than they actually are. And games like World of Warcraft, Minecraft, Genshin Impact that have massive amounts of media surrounding them and streaming surrounding them, they tend to be overinflated. So the point that I'm getting at here is that just because a game is lost all of its social traction doesn't mean that it's lost all of its players. And it's by no means dead. Socially, it may appear that way. However, a lot of these communities are really dug in, and a lot of these communities are really, really dedicated to their MMO, their game, and they'll ride it all the way until developers decide to close the servers. I would have considered a game whose developers have stopped developing it and whose servers have closed forever. I would consider that very dead. Like, that's it. That's nail on the coffin dead. However, I want to show you something. Back in 2020, the fantastic website, love this website, massively overpowered, put out an article. It's working as intended. The big list of City of Hero rogue servers in 2020. And it gives a list of all the discords and all the rogue servers. Now remember, this list is 3 years old, so this has actually expanded. A lot of these projects have just grown. They've just evolved as basically more of these teams are getting the base code figured out, as they're adding new powers. They're really expanding upon City of Heroes. They've grown City of Heroes. The one that I was looking at the most was Homecoming, and Homecoming has its server status. There are currently 828 players online across their 5 servers, with one of their servers having 460 players on currently. What's interesting about this is if you go through this list, which I went through all this, and I found some more outside of this list. I found quite a few more outside of this list. When you do a deep dive, you come to find out that there are more people playing City of Heroes currently at any given time than there are the number of people playing old school RuneScape on Steam. That led me down the rabbit hole of looking into games like Ultima Online, looking into WildStar, looking into Ragnarok Online, Marvel Heroes. I looked at Darkfall, Raiders Z, Global Agenda, Darkfall Unholy Wars, Rusty Hearts, and a few more. Defiance. Looked into Defiance. I used to play Defiance. It was not a great game. And I even looked at some that I don't even know if they ever released in the US. Dragon Ball Online I used to play. I think I had a mod that converted it into English. Warhammer Online, Age of Reckoning, The Matrix Online, and so on. And after looking at these MMOs that are considered dead, very dead, buried in the ground dead, they're not. And I would say they're about as popular as they've ever been. It's such a weird thing. What makes it weird to me and what makes it just absolutely crazy is that these people are not just playing their favorite MMO. They're going, I mean, the amount of bullshit you got to go through to get on some of these private servers, the amount of bullshit the developers of these private servers have to go through to get source code. They've got to dig through code. They got to dig through spaghetti code. They've got to take apart as much of the game as they can. They got to find old clients. They got to find patches. They got to wrangle them together. Not only are there fans of City of Heroes, a game that closed back in, I believe, August of 2012, they're not just fans, and they're not just playing their favorite MMO. They're going through all of the bullshit of getting onto a private server. The developers of these private servers, the owners of these private servers, are going through piles and piles of old code, shitty patches. They're expanding upon the games in a lot of ways. They're creating new classes. They're creating new zones. They're making new bosses and new experiences. So do I consider these MMOs dead? I don't. Which leaves me in a strange position. How do I determine if an MMO is dead or not? And it's strange. It's a weird topic to try to tackle because I'm kind of at a loss. I went into this thinking it was going to be pretty simple, that I could just kind of beat my face against some statistics and I could come up with some conclusions. The deeper I dig, the more layers of this onion that I peel away. I just can't quite find the core. I can't find the bottom. I can't find the dead bodies that everyone believes are out there. A game like Gloria Victis, which just released February 7th, 2023, has about 2,000 concurrent players, a little bit more. A game like Old School RuneScape has about 2,000 players. A game like City of Heroes, closed over a decade ago, its official servers, has about 2,000 concurrent players. So a couple of thoughts that I came across during this whole research bit on dead games, or what makes a game dead, an MMO dead specifically. If City of Heroes has 2,000 concurrent players at all times and it's a decades old dead game, why wouldn't you just purchase the IP, polish it up, get a couple developers to just improve the graphics or whatever, or just build a brand new game on top of the IP? You know you'd have at least 2,000 concurrent players interested in at least purchasing it and trying it. So I don't know why you wouldn't do that. It doesn't seem like the studio who owns it is planning on or will ever do anything with it. It's got enough fans and it's got some die-hard people who have been actually coding and developing it on a private server level. I mean, you could just call up those guys and try to get them on board with making a new City of Heroes game. I don't quite understand, especially if a game like Champions Online is still alive. They're keeping the servers up for 140 players, 200 players a day. I simply do not know. I simply do not understand why these IPs are not being revived. The only time that I could find an instance of games being bought up by other companies were games like Champions Online that was bought up many years ago and basically turned into a cash shop. It's basically just producing passive income for the company who owns it, and the players who are playing on it will spend money on it every now and then, every so often. Even City of Heroes, if you bought it as is, updated it a little bit, and threw a cash shop in it, you'd probably end up making money. Another question that kept popping up that I noticed a lot of Reddit posts about, a lot of Twitter posts about, were basically what I'm calling, do you mourn the dead or venture into the afterlife? Do you just think about the game that's dead and you say that was a good time and you move on? Or do you dust off the download button on a game that's been sitting in your Steam library for the last 10 years untouched? And you go back and possibly ruin all of your memories by seeing this janky mess that you have no interest in? It's an interesting question. A lot of people are looking to recapture a place in their life that they were when they were playing that game, not so much how that game made them feel specifically. I say venture into the afterlife if that's what you want to do. A lot of these old MMOs are a lot of fun to play, not in a serious way, obviously, but to just go back and play the breadth of their content just for fun. Especially games like Secret World Legends. I love jumping in there and playing around every now and then. The Star Trek universe I plan on downloading just because I've never played it before, but I want to give it a try. Just keep in mind that if you're going back to a game to recapture a feeling, to recapture an experience, that's not going to happen because you are not who you were then. Your tastes are not the same as they were then. And the responsibilities you have in your life and what's going on in your life is not the same as it was then. The experience will not be the same. So I would not suggest diving down that rabbit hole and getting all caught up and realizing that it's a lot more hollow and empty than it was before. In a weird way, the graveyards of MMOs past are just as lively as any modern MMO from a standpoint of the number of players you directly interact with. What's the difference between playing on a World of Warcraft server with 1,000 players or a City of Heroes private server with 1,000 players? What's the difference in playing a game whose official servers have been shut off for 10 years and you have to play on a private server and you run around and only see 30, 40 other people? Or playing New World and having the same exact number of people that you run into while you're playing that game? What is the difference? Servers can only hold so many players. You only see so many players. You only interact with so many players. So I would say that there is no reason not to play a game that only has 140 players online. So I know I've been going on and on and on about this, but it's super interesting to me. And I basically got into a bunch of information, and I got into a bunch of nooks and crannies of the internet I've never been to before, and communities I've never seen before. And it made for a very interesting experience and hopefully a very interesting video. So my conclusion is to the question, when is an MMO dead and how to tell? So from everything that I've compiled here, and hopefully I've said everything succinctly enough, I would say that an MMO experiences two deaths. The first is when the developers give up on the game, when they can't develop it anymore, when the official servers shut down. I would say that's the first death of a game, because that's when a lot of your average players, your people who play on consoles, people who are not tech savvy, they have lost their access to the game. They can get into the private servers if they try hard enough, but I would say that's the first death, because some people are going to be blocked out entirely, completely. The second would be when the last person who loves the game dies. When the very last person who loves the game enough to keep developing it and to keep a server going, when they've given up on it, or when they literally perish, that's when the game is dead. So as long as there's people around who have played Ultima Online, who love Ultima Online is not a dead game. And a lot of these communities are only, maybe 10,000 people thick, but they are thick as thieves. So if you like this kind of content, and if you like video games, if you like discussing and talking about video games, make sure you give the video a like and subscribe. I would really, really appreciate that. Helps the content distribute to more people. And until the next one, have a good one.
That was wonderful.
Bravo!
I loved that.
Oh, it was great.
Well, it was pretty good.
Well, it wasn't bad.
Well, there were parts of it that weren't very good, though.
It could have been a lot better.
I didn't really like it.
It was pretty terrible.
It was bad.
It was awful.
It was terrible.
Get him away!
Hey, boo!
Boo!